Welcome to Candidly Fears. I'm your host, Therese Alexander. Candidly Fears is a space where we have conversations that most people avoid, but they're the conversations that have the power to change everything. Here we talk about the truth, alignment, the decisions, lessons, and realities that shape how we live, lead, build, and grow. Because more money won't fix what misalignment keeps breaking. More opportunities won't fix a lack of execution. And transformation doesn't happen by accident. It happens when truth meets action. So, whether you're building a business, rebuilding your life, navigating a transition, or simply trying to become the person you were always called to be, guess what? You're in the right place. So, with that, let's get candid, let's get fierce, and let's begin. Welcome to Candidly Fears. Before we jump into today's conversation, I want to take some time to simply say thank you. Thank you to everyone who came out and listened to the live event, who physically attended the event. And thank you to everyone who sent messages, shared posts, left comments, prayed, encouraged, and supported me throughout this journey. I am not sure where I would be without you. So thank you. So last week in that episode, I shared the evolution of Candidly Fierce. I talked about the pause, what happened, the businesses I started, the lessons, and how what started out as a podcast evolved into something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. But there was one thing I didn't talk about. I didn't talk about what all of that cost me. I didn't talk about the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the loneliness, the tears, and the version of myself that got lost while trying to build everything else. Because if I'm honest, and hey, this is Candidly Fierce, I have to be honest. There was a season of my life where I was working hard at everything, but evolving at absolutely nothing. Let me tell you what I mean by that. You see, the businesses, responsibilities, my employees, my clients, and just simply my life, they all needed me. And somewhere in the middle of meeting everyone else's expectations, guess who I forgot about? I stopped meeting my own. I stopped meeting myself. Now, you see, from the outside, everything looked productive. What do I mean by that? Businesses were booming, they were operating. Goals, yep, they were being accomplished. Opportunities, they kept showing up. Things appeared to be moving, but internally, I was struggling, exhausted, overwhelmed, anxious, angry. Y'all, I was just frustrated. And for the first time in my life, I actually felt disconnected from myself. Have you ever felt disconnected from you? Not disconnected from my businesses, not disconnected from my responsibilities, but disconnected from me. And I can be the first person to tell you that that is a scary place to be, because I've always been a person who can figure things out. I'm the strong friend, right? I've always been the problem solver. In fact, If you know me personally, you probably have heard me joke around and say, I'm the fixer. I'm your personal Olivia Pope. If there is a problem, I guarantee you I can find a solution. If something is broken, guess what? I'll figure out how to fix it. If there's a challenge, I got you there too. I'm going to find a way through it. That's who I've been for most of my life. Let me take it back. That's who I've been for all of my life. But eventually, I had to ask myself a question I wasn't prepared to answer. That question is, who am I when I'm not solving a problem? Who am I when there's nothing to fix? Hmm. Who am I when I have to stop carrying everyone else? You ever asked yourself those questions? If you take your labels off, your titles off, who are you? Well, here's my truth. My truth is, I didn't know because somewhere along the way, I attached my value to what I did instead of who I was. Let me tell you about me. So, people knew me as a business owner, people knew me as the entrepreneur, people knew the financial and strategical professional, people knew the leader, people knew the strong one. People also knew the very best friend. Like I say, I'm my friend's best kept secret. But very few people knew the woman underneath all of it. And if I'm being completely transparent, I don't think I knew her anymore either. Coming to that realization, that season changed me. And one of the biggest things happening in my life at the time was the growth of TNT Logistics, which is my logistics company. What started as an opportunity became something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. The responsibilities and the demands, oh my God, they were growing. Started off as a flower shop, ended up at FedEx. Not sure how all that happened. And as an entrepreneur, I did what many of us do when we're building something that we believe in. I gave it everything I had. I became so focused on creating stability, opportunities, something meaningful, and making sure this business succeeded. And while there is nothing wrong, I mean, nothing at all wrong with working hard, somewhere along the way, I stopped pouring into myself the same way I was pouring into everything else. You see, I wasn't just building a business, I was carrying the weight of making it work. And because so much of my energy was directed outward, other parts of my life slowly began to take a backseat. What parts are we talking about? Let me tell you. This podcast got put on pause. My social media presence, and when I say social media presence, I'm saying everything: LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all of it became almost non existent. I stopped showing up to many of the events and gatherings that I used to enjoy. Some friendships became distance. I'm sorry, y'all. I love y'all, but I'm back. And before I realized it, I had become so focused on building something that I stopped building myself. Hmm. I convinced myself that once I got the business where I wanted it to be, everything else would fall into place. I don't have to tell you all, that's not what happened. Because while the business was growing, I wasn't recognizing any of it. I was so focused on what wasn't working that I couldn't appreciate what was. Has anybody ever been there? I mean, like, focus on the mistakes, the setbacks, the problems, the improvements, the next challenges, the next hurdles, and the next responsibilities. And because of that, I couldn't see the success that was standing right in front of me. Have you ever been there when you're so focused on what's missing that you miss what you've already been blessed with? Like, think about that. That was me. And eventually, the weight became too much. In the midst of all of this, life was happening. So I was carrying grief, disappointment, bad decisions, expectations, pressure. And underneath all of that was a belief I didn't even realize I had. And that belief was that your girl, just her, without her labels, without her job titles, that she was not enough. Not Therese. I mean, like, just Therese. You know, the person without the titles, the accomplishments, the businesses, the strong friend, the provider, the protector, the problem solver. Yep, her. Without those, she didn't matter. And when you carry a belief like that long enough, eventually it begins to impact everything: your mindset, your confidence, your relationships, your leaderships, your faith. I mean, everything. Then one day, I reached a breaking point, not because everything around me began to fall apart or fall together, but because I did. I remember sitting at home after another sleepless night. I was depressed. I felt hopeless. The business, them trucks, y'all, TNT Logistics was depleting me financially, mentally, and emotionally. My anxiety was through the roof. I cried so much that literally I had no tears left. I was just all cried out. And for the first time in a long time, I gave up. I stopped trying to fix it. I stopped trying to solve it. I stopped trying to carry it. And I surrendered. What does that mean? It simply means I just went back to my foundation. I went back to the only source I know, and that was God. And that decision changed everything. Hmm. I wish I could tell you that after I surrendered, everything immediately got better. I wish I could tell you that the business problems disappeared, that the stress disappeared, and that life suddenly became easy. But I am not here to tell you a fairy tale story. I am here to be candid and tell you the truth. That's not what happened. What changed first wasn't my circumstances. What changed first was my perspective. And that's an important distinction because so many of us spend our lives waiting on our circumstances to change before we decide to change. What do I mean by that? So many of us are sitting around waiting for the promotion. Hmm. We're waiting for the relationship. we're waiting for the business to grow. We're waiting for the money to just rain down out of heaven. We're waiting for the better opportunity. We're waiting for someone to come and just choose us. We're waiting for life to finally just make some sort of sense. And what I learned during that season is that sometimes God isn't waiting for your circumstances to change. Sometimes He's waiting on you. Yes, you to change. Because you got to remember, faith without works is dead. I remember opening up YouTube one morning. I wasn't searching for a particular message. I wasn't looking for a specific pastor. I wasn't even expecting anything profound. I just wanted a break from reality, and I decided to not go to social media. I just opened YouTube, and there it was. It was a sermon called Don't Lose You by Pastor Mike Jr. Looking back at that day now, I don't think that I found that sermon. I think that sermon found me. And the reason why I said that is because every word felt like he was speaking directly to me, and he knew exactly where I was, not where people thought I was, not where I pretended to be, but where I actually was. And if I'm honest, the space that I was in was broken, exhausted, frustrated, disconnected from myself. And somewhere during that message, I realized something. I spent years trying to build businesses, build opportunities, build financial security, build success. But I hadn't spent enough time building me. I had become so focused on producing the results that I had neglected the person responsible for producing them. And that realization, it hit so hard because if the foundation is broken, eventually everything built on top of it becomes unstable. It was like the foundation of me was built in quicksand. I wasn't losing because I lacked talent, intelligence, or discipline. Actually, I wasn't losing at all externally, but internally, I was losing because I stopped investing in myself. I stopped learning, I stopped growing, and I stopped becoming. Not because I suddenly had all the answers, but because I finally started asking better questions. What are the questions you may ask? Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? I started asking, what is this teaching me? Instead of asking, God, why am I so far behind? I started asking, how far have I already come? Instead of focusing on every setback, every mistake, and every disappointment, I started looking for the lesson. And once I started looking for the lesson, I began to see them everywhere, right? God has an amazing sense of humor if we really just open our eyes and see the character and integrity he's trying to pull out of us in all of our setbacks. See, when I say that, I mean that setback was teaching me resilience. The disappointment was teaching me perspective. The delay was teaching me patience. The pressure was building capacity. The challenges were building character. And for the first time, I stopped seeing my circumstances as punishment. I started seeing them as preparation, right? That's when I realized that some of the things I was actually calling setbacks were, in fact, setups, not setups for comfort or convenience, but setups for growth, setups for leadership, setups for purpose, and setups for the next version of myself. And once that perspective shifted, everything, and when I say everything, personally and professionally, started looking different. Not because any of it had changed, not because my life had changed, but because internally I had changed. Now let's talk about the title of today's episode. You're not stuck. I promise you, you are not stuck, but you are outgrowing your environment. Because I believe there are people listening right now who are exactly where I was. You feel restless. You feel frustrated. You feel disconnected, like something isn't working. And you've convinced yourself that you're stuck. You've convinced yourself that your life is not meant for more than what it's doing right now. But what if you're not? What if what's actually happened is that you've changed? What if you're trying to fit a new version of you inside an old environment? Because that's exactly what I was doing. Hmm. What I mean by that, the conversations, the mindset, the survival mode mentality, the constant hustle mode, and the relationships built around an old version of me, it no longer fit. I kept forcing that to fit. And because it didn't, I thought I was stuck. And so for a while, I mistook that discomfort for failure. But it wasn't failure, it was growth. And growth is so uncomfortable. Is growth uncomfortable? Because it requires stretching, letting go, and becoming. The challenge is that most of us want growth without transition. Let me be the first to tell you that's not happening. We want expansion without discomfort. We want the next version of our lives without releasing the current version. But it doesn't work that way. Let me say it again. You have to release to grow. Sometimes the reason you're frustrated isn't because you're failing. It's because you're actually succeeding in an environment that you've already outgrown. And the longer you try to force yourself into places, conversations, relationships, mindsets, and environments that no longer align with who you're becoming, the more disconnected you become from yourself. And that's why so many people are exhausted. They're carrying a version of themselves that no longer fits. They're performing, shrinking, dimming their light, pretending, and deep down, They know they're being called to something greater. The problem isn't that they don't know. The problem is that they are too afraid to move. They're too afraid to become. They're too afraid to let go. But growth always requires release. I'm going to keep saying that. You have to release. And that's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. One of the greatest lessons I learned during that season is that wealth is so much bigger than money. And again, honesty is the best policy over at Candidly Fierce. So that realization changed the way I viewed almost everything. Before that season, I believed that wealth was primarily the result of hard work and discipline. You know what they say: work hard, stay focused, remain disciplined, execute consistently. And while those things matter, they're not the whole story. You see, I learned firsthand that you can be disciplined and still be depleted. You can be productive and still be miserable. You can be successful on paper and still be struggling internally. You can build something so impressive while simultaneously losing yourself in the process. And that's why I believe now that wealth has to be viewed from an internal and an external perspective. Wealth is financial, but it is also emotional, mental, spiritual, relational, leadership, character, integrity, and alignment. Because if your internal world is in chaos, eventually your external world will reflect it. I told you before in last week, personal bleeds into professional and professional bleeds into personal. That's why I say all the time that alignment matters, because more money will not fix what misalignment keeps breaking. More opportunities, success, or recognition won't fix it. Eventually, you have to do the internal work. And that's exactly what this season forced me to do. It forced me to examine my mindset, beliefs, habits, and perspectives. The stories I was telling myself, the version of myself I was still carrying. And as I began doing that work, I started seeing something I had never fully understood before. That something is everything is connected. Your mindset impacts your decisions. Your decisions impact your actions. Your actions impact your outcomes. Your outcomes impact your confidence, and your confidence impact what you believe is possible. You see what I mean? Everything is connected. And that's actually how the Fierce Financial Services ecosystem was born. Not from a business plan, not from a marketing strategy, not from a branding exercise, but from a lesson, a very, very painful lesson, I might add, but a lesson that taught me that wealth, leadership, business, purpose, and personal growth, they are all connected. And guess what? You can try, but you cannot separate them. You can't build sustainable wealth with a broken mindset. You can't become an effective leader while refusing to grow. You can't build a thriving business while neglecting your character. And you certainly can't sustain success if you're disconnected from yourself. And that's exactly why Fierce Financial Services exists. Because hey, we all love money and money does matter. Strategy matters. You think about it? Execution, it matters. But that's also why this podcast is so important. And it's why Candidly Fierce exists, because truth matters, awareness matters, perspectives matters. And that's why I decided that we need the Passion to Profit Society, because awareness without execution changes nothing. The truth is, every part of this ecosystem was born from the same lesson. What I mean by that is, you have to understand that you have to become the person capable of sustaining what you're praying for. And that requires growth, alignment, responsibility, and most important, it requires a decision. A decision. So we have to decide to do something. As I look back over that season of my life, I realized that the biggest battle I was fighting wasn't with my business. It actually wasn't with my circumstances, money, or with other people. The biggest battle I was fighting was with myself. The old version of me believed she wasn't enough, attached her values to her titles, believed she had to be superwoman and solve every problem, believed she had to carry everything, and believed she had something to prove. And every day, that version of me was competing with the woman I was becoming. The woman who understood her worth, purpose, and that she didn't have to earn her value, and that setbacks were not proof of failure. They were preparations, lessons, and opportunities to grow. And that's why I will always say that it's you versus you, not you versus your circumstances, your past, your critics, or the people who doubted you. You versus you. The person you are today versus the person you're capable of becoming, or the person that you really are when you just look yourself in the mirror. That's the real battle. And the moment I understood that, everything began to shift. Like I said, not because life got easier, but because I got stronger. Not because the obstacles disappeared, but because my perspective and outlook changed. And when your perspective changes, your life begins to change. I'm going to say that again. When your perspective changes, your life begins to change. So before we close today, I want to leave you with a challenge. I want you to take a few moments after this episode, not a lot, just a couple, and ask yourself one simple question. That is, what have I outgrown that I'm still trying to force myself to fit into? Maybe it's a mindset. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a friendship. Or maybe you're like me, a habit or an environment. Maybe it's an old version of yourself. Whatever it is, be honest because awareness is the first step. However, awareness alone isn't enough. Once you figure out what the answer is to that question, you have to make a decision. You have to take ownership. You have to take control. You have to stop waiting for someone else to come rescue you because they're not coming. Stop waiting for someone else to validate you because they're not going to do it. Stop waiting for someone else to choose you. They don't matter. Choose yourself. Make the decision. Then take the step. Trust the process and always remember this. Your life changes the moment you stop focusing on what is happening to you and start focusing on what is happening within you. Because at the end, and I mean the very end of the day, it is you versus you. So, with that, take a moment to reflect on the areas of your life where growth is calling you to a higher level because maybe you're not stuck. Maybe you're simply outgrown the environment you're trying so hard to stay connected to. And maybe, just maybe, hmm, the next version of your life is waiting on the other side of a decision. So, with that, until next time, stay true to you, stay fierce, stay thoughtful, be fierce.